Well, let's kick things off with the big story that came out that we actually spent an entire episode talking about last week. And then, of course, the final decision was made by DraftKings, Adam, to not go forward with the surcharge that was at least talked about. And we mentioned it last week that it was not an official thing, that it was certainly something that was just kind of in theory. And I actually got a lot of good feedback from our episode last week of people just kind of saying, I understand kind of what everybody's saying with all of this. And that being said, DraftKings ended up not going with it.
The DraftKings surcharge rests in peace after 13 days of existence. Does that mean that it will not Undertaker.gif rise from the dead at some point? No, it certainly could. But here's the news as we know it. Everyone was keeping an eye out for FanDuel's earnings call, which happened this week, Flutter, I should say, including the FanDuel brand, and they made clear that they were not going to match the surcharge that DraftKings planned to place on winning bettors in high-tax states. I said that last week that I thought that was the most likely outcome. You said that last week that you thought it was the most likely outcome, that they would not go with the surcharge, but they would leave it open in the future to do something similar. And really, FanDuel didn't address the future. They just said this is not something that we plan on doing right now. And I think the surprising part to me and to a lot of people is the speed at which DraftKings put out a statement immediately after the earnings call by FanDuel to say, we always listen to our customers. We're not going to go forward with the surcharge. And that's pretty much all we've heard from them at this point after Jason Robbins, the CEO of DraftKings, had gone in pretty hard in defense of the concept on the DraftKings earnings call to say that this is something that they needed to do in order to meet their bottom line with the tax increase in Illinois, with the high tax rate in New York, and of course Pennsylvania has been high for a while. He also said on the DraftKings call that it would take, quote, quite a lot, end quote, for DraftKings to choose to drop that surcharge plan. Well, reasonable question can be asked as to, were you just waiting to see what FanDuel did? And DraftKings might argue against that concept. However, when you put out your statement almost immediately after the FanDuel earnings call, there's a question about whether correlation is causation in that particular case. Now, I want to address part of what I've seen out on social media with some people kind of dunking on DraftKings and saying, oh, it was such a terrible idea, and this and that. And I think that kind of undersells the seriousness with which a company undertakes something like that. There has to be some level of research and staff work that has gone into, should we do this and how should we do this? It doesn't come out of thin air. DraftKings doesn't send Jason Robbins out there to say, you know what? Snap, we're going to do a surcharge on winning bettors in high-tax states. Like, I think it's just a little too casual to dunk on DraftKings for it. But I do think there are serious questions that need to be asked about a publicly traded company announcing this type of plan and then immediately backtracking on it. And we can get into that on this episode a little bit, Matt, but were you surprised that it happened as quickly as it did?
I think there was a little bit of Jerry Maguire in them, possibly, where they, who's coming with me, and it's like they put it out there and like waiting on somebody to be like, yeah, you know what, this is, or at least come out and say like, even though we might not do this right this second, it is certainly something, we might do in the future, or at least considered, or whatever, yada, 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 right? And when that didn't happen at all, then it's kind of went back to what you and Eric were talking about last week of like, it might really and truly come down to what FanDuel ends up doing in all of this. And certainly that seems to be what they, seems to be what they ended up doing here. And I agree with you. Listen, I'm sure there was an incredible amount of internal dialogue within the company of, do we just put the surcharge out in front of everybody? Remember, they're a DFS company, so they've dealt with all this, like, hidden rake stuff and like, is it fair to the customer for them to have to try to calculate the rake in their head, et cetera, et cetera. We said this on the thing last week, and this isn't to say that this isn't going to happen in the future, right? But to give credit where credit's due, although I'm not jumping up and down about, a surcharge getting tacked on a deal, but to give credit where credit's due, they didn't just sneak this into like futures holds, which they easily could have done and like, kind of hid this. Now, you and I would have found out somewhere down the line because somebody would have crunched the numbers and somebody would have been like, what the hell just happened to DraftKings futures markets? Like they're holding 3% more, than they were before. So to give credit where credit's due, they were upfront with all of this and did come out and just say, hey, this is the way we're going to do it and how we're going to go about it. But, now, Adam, does it lead us down the road of, hold getting increased or, we start to see a little bit more 112 lines instead of the 110 lines and all the different stuff. Like, is that something that is probably more imminent than we think?
That's the reasonable next question that has to be asked after this decision by DraftKings to drop the surcharge, right? We have talked a lot about how customers at recreational books generally are not price sensitive. That's what we've seen so far in 6 years of the U.S. market. We spent a lot of time last week talking about, is there an inexhaustible supply of people willing to play 10-leg parlays, right? And are you going to churn through them, or will people just stay because they like putting in their lottery tickets? Well, you could bury a lot of additional hold inside a same-game parlay with no one paying attention, right? It's not all that difficult to change those prices on your most popular product to make it so that people are, that correlation on that bet goes from 13-1 down to 12-1. It's not all that difficult to hold some of that back. Now, does that accomplish the purpose that they want? I don't know. What purpose did they want? That's ultimately the bigger question here, because I've seen some, and when I say some, prominently, Nigel Eccles, one of the founders of FanDuel, was getting into a back and forth with our Sam McQuillan on Twitter, in which he was saying that he thought Sam was missing the point, that DraftKings was trying to signal to states not to change their tax rate, or for certain states not to go for a higher tax rate if they legalize. And the argument is reasonable. We talked about it last week on the podcast, that this was meant as something to send a message. However, if you're going to pull it back 13 days after you launch it, you're telling legislators you're not that serious. And beyond that, you're also making it clear that you don't need it that badly, right? Like, you don't need the money that badly that you're saying, yep, come hell or high water, we've got to do this because we've got to find a way to make money. And the other piece of this is that DraftKings shaved about 15% off its share price last week. The market reacted terribly to this plan. That seems to be a lack of market research on the DraftKings part to understand what would happen there. Now, it's bounced back this week, not all the way to where the share price was 2 weeks ago, but they did get a positive response from saying they wouldn't go forward with this. But my question to someone back like Nigel is to say, is it worth shaving 15% off your share price to send some sort of a trial balloon message out to legislators? I think there are a number of better ways that they could have done that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that this is really going to, if they want to test the market, Adam, with what they were kind of saying, that they believe that their product is just better and that people are going to play their product because they just enjoy playing on DraftKings, right? They like the menu better, that they like the way that it functions better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think instead of adding a surcharge on, it's like we said. So what if you did move lines to minus 111? Now, you're not going to get the same money out of that you would get from the surcharge or something like that. But listen, over the course of thousands and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of bets, like people who aren't, who don't do this on a daily basis, right? I mean, like, that extra penny, it means something, right? And it means something over the course of tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of bets or whatever. So it's like, could you, if you're DraftKings, say, okay, we believe in our product, we believe in our customer base, we believe people are loyal, we need to make a little bit extra money here or whatever. We're not going to do anything drastic. Instead of 110, it's 111 now. That, I think, would be the true test of customer loyalty. And like, would someone leave for a penny, Adam? You know what I'm saying? Like, would someone leave for a penny? Would they go to DraftKings? Would they go to Fanatics? Would they go to MGM? Would they go to Would they go to whoever for a penny? And I think you would get an answer pretty quick as to whether people would do that or not. My guess is there would not be very many people that left if you did it in that fashion, as opposed to tacking on a surcharge to winning bets, because I have enough casual better friends of mine. I've talked about a ton of them here I've talked about it a ton here on the podcast, but it happened again just this past week, right? Where they're asking me, hey man, FedEx playoffs are starting. Who are you betting for golf, right? And I'm like, I like this guy, I like this guy, I like this guy, right? Well, they show me the ticket of them betting these guys. Adam, they went to quite literally the worst price you could get in the entire market to bet these guys, as opposed to like going to one of the other. They're in Louisiana. There's 7 other books that they could have bet at or whatever, right? And it all went back to the same thing we've talked about that I've brought up on this podcast for the last year. They like the rewards. They don't care, right? I mean, like they just want to bet at the same place because they get status and they get the reward and they don't care. Like one number they bet, a guy was 33-1, and literally had they opened another app, the guy was 45-1, right? And I mean, that is a lot that you're leaving on the table, but they don't care because they like the rewards that they're getting. It's all this. So I don't know. I think that there is a way to test market loyalty and try to make a little bit of extra money and try to test what you believe to be the best product in the market and see if people stay or not. And I think if you did it in a micro fashion, that maybe you would accomplish at least a little bit of what you're trying to do.
Bring up another idea. What if you try to get the money on the other side by not spending it? Right? What if your promos just disappear? What if you basically say, you know what? In this state, that state, and the other state, no promos, period. No profit boosts, right? Yeah. Nothing. We do nothing for you. Now, they've already done some of the slash of marketing spend, but I think that also could test out product to say, if you want to play our product, you get nothing extra. You like our product so much that you're going to play it despite the fact that there are no extra tokens. There are no anything. There's no bet 25 to get 25. There's nothing whatsoever. You've got to play us because you like us better. I think that is another way that you can test it that doesn't require the PR hit and the reputation hit. And frankly, in some level, the clout hit of going out there and doing what they did with the surcharge, because DraftKings ultimately sent a message to the market that we're number 2, right? If FanDuel doesn't do this, then we can't do this. And there's been such a clear battle between these two at the top. And it was only last summer that we were talking about, did DraftKings catch FanDuel, right? Yeah. There were some states in which they had better market share. And we were saying going into football season, it's reasonable to ask, is DraftKings now a co-number 1 with FanDuel, or are they going to pull ahead? To me, this doesn't send number 1 vibes. This sends number 2 vibes. It says, we are number 2, and we're not going to do it if FanDuel doesn't do it. Because FanDuel wasn't the first book to come out and say we're not doing it. You had smaller books like Bet Rivers and others coming out and saying, yeah, this isn't for us. We're not going to do a surcharge. So to me, if you're in DraftKings position, there are just a lot of post-mortem questions now that you need to ask yourself about how this all happened, what you said to the market, and how you recover from it before football season. Because the other piece of this equation is that you couldn't have done this at a worse time, right? Because we're just about to go into the prime customer acquisition season. Maybe FanDuel already had money planned to try to get some of DraftKings customers. Maybe others are out there saying, you know what? We didn't think we had an opportunity to poach from DraftKings, and now maybe we do. Because the fact that DraftKings dropped the surcharge is going to get a lot less coverage and a lot less play than the fact that they put it in the first place, right? You're going to get a lot more thought from people in the market of, wait a minute, isn't that the book that charges more? Oh, no, well, they said they were going to do it, and then they didn't do it. Oh, well, will they do it again? And that's the sort of thing that I don't think you really need right now coming into September.